She was his mother. His protector. His greatest defender against a world that never seemed to understand him. From the moment he was born, Lachelle Dansby dedicated her life to making sure her son had everything he needed: love, guidance, and, most of all, safety. But what happens when the danger doesn't come from the outside world, but from within? The story you're about to hear is unlike any other. It's a tale of love twisted into something dark and unrecognizable, of a bond so powerful it became deadly. It started with a devoted mother and her troubled son, just the two of them against the world. But behind closed doors, something sinister was growing. A secret obsession. A horrifying delusion. And one terrifying night that no one saw coming. The crime shook the nation, not just because of its brutality, but because of the haunting question it left behind. Could this tragedy have been stopped? Were there signs no one noticed? Or was it always destined to end in blood? How does love turn into something so twisted? How does a mother's devotion become the very thing that seals her fate? And in the end, was she a victim of her son's illness, or a prisoner of her own denial? Before we dive into this disturbing case, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more harrowing tales of love, madness, and betrayal. Lachelle Dansby was the kind of mother people admired. A woman of quiet strength, unshakable faith, and endless devotion. At 42, she had spent her entire life pouring every ounce of love she had into one person, her son, Zephaniah. She raised him alone after his father abandoned them before he was born. She called him her miracle child, the greatest blessing in her life. But those closest to her knew the truth. That love, no matter how deep, was never enough to fix what was broken. Zeph was different from the moment he could walk. He wasn't like the other kids. He spoke to things that weren't there, had violent tantrums that made other parents uncomfortable. Teachers whispered about his strange behavior, his sudden outbursts, the way his eyes would glaze over like he was somewhere else. And when he turned 14, the diagnosis confirmed what Lachelle had been too afraid to say out loud: schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. A mind trapped in constant war, a reality twisted by hallucinations and delusions. But Lachelle never gave up on him. She refused to believe her son was beyond saving. She took him to doctors, pushed him into therapy, begged him to take the medication that could quiet the voices in his head. But Zeph refused. He didn't believe he was sick. He believed he was chosen. He said God spoke directly to him, that the whispers in his mind were not hallucinations but divine messages. And slowly, his love for his mother began to transform into something far more dangerous. Lachelle brushed off the warning signs, convinced that if she just loved him enough, he would be okay. She ignored the way his stares lingered too long, the way he became possessive, jealous whenever she spoke to another man. She overlooked the late-night conversations he had with himself, the ones that always seemed to end in violent whispers. Even when the neighbors started locking their doors when they saw Zeph coming, even when the pastor at their church suggested he seek deliverance, she held on to the hope that her son was still in there somewhere, that the sweet little boy she once rocked to sleep hadn't been swallowed whole by his demons. But Zeph wasn't a little boy anymore. He was a 20-year-old man with a mind unraveling at the seams. And his thoughts were no longer just disturbing, they were dangerous. The people in their Houston neighborhood had their own opinions. Some saw Lachelle as a saint, a mother who sacrificed everything for a son the world had given up on. Others weren't so sure. They saw the way Zeph paced the sidewalks at night, how his eyes darted around like he was seeing things no one else could. They heard the arguments, the times Lachelle's voice shook with something between exhaustion and fear. But no one stepped in. Because Lachelle always told them the same thing: Zeph was her son. And she wasn't going to abandon him like his father had. But what Lachelle didn't know was that her son had already made up his mind. In his twisted reality, their bond had to be something more. And if she wouldn't accept that, he was willing to do whatever it took to make her understand. She spent her life protecting him. But in the end, there was no one left to protect her. Lachelle had always told herself that no matter how bad things got, Zeph was still her son. That deep down, he was just a lost soul, a troubled young man who needed her love, her patience, her prayers. But by the time he turned 20, something inside him had shifted. The delusions that once made him whisper to shadows had become something else, something darker, more dangerous. And this time, the voices weren't just speaking to him. They were speaking about her. At first, it was subtle. He would stare at her for too long, his eyes filled with something that sent a cold shiver down her spine. His words became strange, unsettling. He started telling her that she was the only one who understood him, that no other woman in the world could ever compare. He said God had made her just for him. That their bond was sacred. That they were meant to be together, forever. Lachelle brushed it off, convincing herself it was just another one of his delusions. But then, it got worse. He began hovering over her, always watching. She would wake up in the middle of the night to find him standing in the doorway of her bedroom, just staring. Sometimes, he would sit at the edge of her bed while she slept, his breathing slow and deep, as if he were memorizing the rhythm of her body. One night, she woke up to find his hand resting gently on her cheek. He wasn't a little boy anymore. He was a man, his fingers rough, his grip too firm. "You belong to me, Ma," he whispered. His breath was warm against her ear. Lachelle yanked away, her heart slamming against her ribs. "Zeph, what are you doing?" But he just smiled. "You'll understand soon." From that moment on, everything changed. Zeph became more controlling, more possessive. He would get furious if she spent too much time outside the house. If she spoke to another man, even a pastor or a cashier, he would glare at her in silence, his fingers twitching like he was holding something back. He would accuse her of trying to betray him, of looking for someone else, of forgetting that she was his and his alone. One night, he snapped. She had gone to church alone, needing a few hours of peace, of prayer. When she returned home, he was waiting for her in the dark, sitting at the kitchen table, his fingers drumming against the wood. The moment she stepped inside, he slammed his fist down so hard the entire table shook. "Where were you?" His voice was eerily calm. "You know where I was, Zeph. I went to. Don't lie to me." He shot up, knocking over his chair. "I felt it, Ma. I know you were thinking about leaving me. You were praying for a way out, weren't you?" Lachelle tried to reason with him, tried to tell him he was scaring her, but he wasn't listening. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her close, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You don't get it yet," he said, his voice almost desperate. "God made us for each other. You're my gift. You're the only woman pure enough to carry my children. We can't fight fate, Ma. We can't." The room was spinning. Lachelle felt like she was going to be sick. For years, she had ignored the warnings, convinced herself that Zeph's illness wasn't dangerous. That his love for her, no matter how twisted, was still just love. But this wasn't love. This was something else. Her hands trembled as she shoved him away, fear pounding in her chest. "I'm calling the hospital," she blurted. "You need help, Zeph. You need to be committed." For the first time, he went completely still. His expression shifted, darkened. And then, slowly, a smile curled across his lips. "You're not sending me away," he murmured. Lachelle's blood ran cold. She had made a fatal mistake. She had threatened to take away the only thing he believed he had left. And now, he was never going to let her go. March 17, 2025. A day that should have been like any other. A day that should have ended with Lachelle Dansby coming home, kicking off her shoes, and collapsing onto the couch after another long shift. But this was no ordinary night. This was the night Zeph had been waiting for. The night he had convinced himself was fate. When Lachelle stepped through the front door, something immediately felt off. The air was thick with the scent of burning candles, vanilla, jasmine, and something else, something metallic. The flickering flames cast long, ghostly shadows across the living room walls, and from the kitchen, soft gospel music hummed from an old radio. At first, she thought maybe Zeph had finally calmed down. Maybe the storm had passed. Maybe he had taken her words to heart. She was wrong. He was waiting for her in the dining room, standing perfectly still, dressed in an old suit that used to belong to his grandfather. It was too big for him, the sleeves hanging past his wrists, the collar stiff and awkward. In one hand, he clutched his Bible, fingers curling tightly around the worn leather cover. In the other, a gleaming kitchen knife caught the candlelight, its blade reflecting his hollow, unreadable eyes. "Lachelle," he breathed, his lips parting into a slow, eerie smile. "You came home." Her heart lurched. "Zeph. What are you doing?" She kept her voice steady, careful not to make any sudden movements. He flipped open the Bible, his gaze never leaving hers as he trailed his fingers across the fragile pages. Ephesians 5 verse 31, he murmured. "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh." Lachelle swallowed hard. "Zeph, put the knife down." He ignored her. "You see, Ma, I've been praying on it. Meditating. And God finally spoke to me. He told me it's time." His fingers twitched around the handle of the knife, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Time for us to stop pretending." The air left Lachelle's lungs. "Stop pretending what?" "That you don't love me the way I love you. That you don't feel it too." His expression hardened, his grip on the knife tightening. "You were meant to be my wife. My queen. But you tried to leave me. You tried to send me away." Lachelle took a careful step back. "Zeph, listen to me," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "You're sick. This isn't real. You need help." His face twisted with fury. "Help?" He let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "I don't need help. You need to stop fighting destiny." And then, in an instant, he lunged. The knife flashed in the candlelight, and before she could react, the blade sank deep into her side. A scream tore from her throat as pain exploded through her body. She stumbled backward, clutching at the wound, hot blood spilling between her fingers. "Shoo," Zeph whispered, his free hand stroking her face as he drove the knife in deeper. "Don't fight it. This is how it's supposed to be." Lachelle's survival instincts kicked in. With everything she had, she shoved him away, sending him staggering back into the table. The candles toppled, wax spilling onto the tablecloth, flames licking at the edges. She turned, trying to make it to the door, to the neighbors, to anyone. But she didn't make it far. Zeph was on her in seconds, dragging her to the ground, pinning her beneath him. The knife plunged into her over and over, each thrust more brutal than the last. 20. 30. The blade carving his love into her flesh. Even as the life drained from her, he kept whispering in her ear. "You belong to me." By the time it was over, the room was silent except for the crackling of burning wax and the faint hum of the gospel song still playing in the background. Zeph sat beside her, rocking her lifeless body in his arms, his blood-stained fingers brushing over her face with eerie tenderness. And then, as if conducting a sacred ritual, he carefully undressed her, wiping away the blood before slipping her into a white lace nightgown, one she had worn on her wedding night. A symbol of purity. Of union. He positioned her hands in prayer, placed a kiss on her forehead, and then curled up beside her, holding her close as he drifted into sleep. Morning came, sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the horror of the night before. But Zeph didn't hide. He didn't run. Instead, he walked outside, blood dried in thick streaks across his face, his suit soaked in his mother's final moments. A police officer, just beginning his morning patrol, spotted him immediately. But before the officer could say a word,
Zeph simply smiled and lifted his hands in surrender. "God told me to take what's mine," he said, his voice eerily calm. And just like that, the nightmare was over. But for those who knew Lachelle, for those who had seen her fight so hard to save her son, one question would remain forever unanswered. Had she ever really stood a chance? The moment the news broke, the nation was horrified. A mother murdered in her own home. Not by a stranger, not by a scorned lover, but by her only son, the boy she had spent her life protecting. The headlines were relentless. Son butchers devoted mother in twisted act of love. Texas horror, man murders mom in disturbing religious ritual. The story spread like wildfire, captivating the public in the worst way possible. Talk shows, news stations, and social media exploded with speculation. Who was Zephaniah Dansby? Was he a cold-blooded killer or a victim of his own shattered mind? Could this tragedy have been prevented, or had Lachelle been doomed from the start? As details of the case unraveled, the horror only deepened. Investigators combing through Zeph's bedroom found evidence that painted an even darker picture. Stacks of worn-out journals, their pages filled with obsessive ramblings about his mother. "She is my rib. She was made for me. No man shall take what belongs to me." Crude, childlike drawings of the two of them, hand in hand, halos above their heads, bound together by what he called divine union. Some sketches were pure fantasy, depicting them in wedding attire, surrounded by angels. Others were far more disturbing, images of Lachelle drenched in blood, her hands outstretched in prayer, Zeph standing over her with a knife. And then there were the recordings. Hours upon hours of Zeph speaking in tongues, his voice shifting between frantic whispers and guttural wails. In one chilling clip, he repeated over and over, "God has spoken. God has chosen. I must take what is mine." The last recording, made just 2 days before the murder, was the most unsettling of all. "She fears me now. She sees the truth, but she fights it. She was sent for me, but the devil has poisoned her mind. I must purify her. I must make her whole." It was a window into the storm raging inside his mind. And yet, despite the overwhelming evidence of his delusions, the public was divided. Some saw Lachelle as a mother blinded by love. A woman who ignored the warning signs, who refused to accept that her son had become a danger to not only himself but to her. She should have had him committed, one commentator argued. She should have left. Any sane mother would have run. Others were quick to defend her, pointing fingers at the broken mental health system that had failed them both. "She did everything she could," a family friend said in a tearful interview. "She begged for help, but where was it? How do you save someone who doesn't want to be saved?" Religious leaders and psychological experts weighed in, debating whether Zeph's obsession was purely delusional or rooted in something far more insidious. Was this the twisted result of untreated mental illness? Or had something deeper, something darker, festered inside him for years? One thing was certain, no one would ever forget the name Zephaniah Dansby. The trial of Zephaniah Dansby was one of the most chilling courtroom battles the state of Texas had ever seen. From the moment he stepped into the courtroom, clad in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, there was an eerie stillness in the air. He was no longer the wide-eyed boy his mother once protected. He was a man accused of the unthinkable, his blank expression betraying no hint of remorse. The defense wasted no time building their argument. Zeph was a profoundly disturbed young man, a victim of severe schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. His mind was a battlefield of delusions, paranoia, and violent fantasies beyond his control. They painted a picture of a lost soul, a man who had no grasp of reality when he took his mother's life. They pleaded with the jury to see him not as a murderer, but as a man possessed by his illness. The only humane solution, they argued, was to commit him to a psychiatric institution, not a prison cell. But the prosecution was relentless. They portrayed Zeph as something far more sinister, not just a mentally ill man, but a dangerous manipulator who knew exactly what he was doing. They dissected every disturbing entry from his journals, played his haunting voice recordings, and forced the jury to confront the sheer brutality of his crime. The moment the prosecution played the chilling 911 call, Zeph's eerily calm voice confessing that, "God told me to take what's mine," the energy in the courtroom shifted. There was no insanity in his tone, no confusion, no fear. Just cold, calculated certainty. Witnesses took the stand one by one. Neighbors, friends, and Lachelle's devastated pastor spoke of her unwavering love for her son, how she had fought so hard to save him, only to become his victim. But the most gut-wrenching testimony came from the forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Zeph. She detailed her interviews with him, revealing a mind that, while deeply disturbed, was also terrifyingly aware. When asked if he regretted what he had done, Zeph allegedly smiled and whispered, "She's still mine. Nothing has changed." Even after her death, in his twisted reality, he still believed they were together. The jury took just 3 hours to decide his fate. The verdict? Guilty of first-degree murder. When the judge rejected the insanity plea and sentenced Zeph to life in prison without the possibility of parole, there was a hushed moment of silence in the courtroom. And then, just as the gavel struck, Zeph finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost serene. "God told me you'd try to stop me. But she's mine forever." Even in chains, even condemned to spend the rest of his life behind bars, Zephaniah Dansby still believed that his mother belonged to him. This case is more than just a tragedy, it's a haunting testament to the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness, unchecked obsession, and a system that so often fails those who need help the most. Lachelle Dansby dedicated her life to saving her son. She fought for him, protected him, and refused to give up on him, even when the warning signs became impossible to ignore. But in the end, the person she loved most became the one who destroyed her. Could this horror have been prevented? If she had sought help sooner, if she had turned him in before it was too late, would she still be alive? Or was she always doomed, trapped by the impossible hope that a mother's love could be stronger than the darkness consuming her son? And what about the system? How many more families are out there right now, struggling in silence, afraid to ask for help, afraid of what might happen if they do? This case forces us to confront unsettling questions about mental illness, personal responsibility, and the terrifying reality that sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones who can hurt us the worst. If this case disturbed you, like this video and subscribe for more haunting tales of love turned deadly.